Let's bring in Mike Hanna in Washington, D.C. for the latest. Bring us up to speed with what's been happening on the Senate floor. Mike, will this vote end the shutdown for good?
Well, the vote is still going on at the moment. It's reported that a few Republican senators are still to cast their vote. But of the greatest importance is the fact that 8 Democrats have voted in favor of this bill. Hence, it has now got that 60% majority, breaking the filibuster. Now, this is what is called a cloture. That is a procedure by which the Senate agrees to continue the debate about the legislation and begin introducing and passing the bills aimed at ending the shutdown. But the important thing about the cloture vote is that once it is passed at that 60% majority, every subsequent vote is by a simple majority. So it would appear to be plain sailing in the Senate to pass this bill and then to pass the continuing resolution refunding government and ending the closure. But at the same time, this has still got to go back to the House for ratification. The House is on vacation at the moment. It would take at least 2 days for House members to get back here. So the House will need to vote on the continuing resolution, and then it would need to go to President Trump for signature. So there's still a lot of potential stumbling blocks in getting this legislation into place, in funding the government, even if only until the end of January. So there's still many hurdles to be crossed.
Many hurdles to be crossed still. Thank you very much, Mike, for that. Let's discuss this further now with Niall Stanage, who's a political analyst and the White House columnist for The Hill, joining us also from Washington, D.C. Good to have you with us, Niall. So as Mike, our correspondent, said, there are lots of stumbling blocks still. How do you view this compromise? Does it represent a genuine breakthrough or just a temporary political bandage to get the government running again?
Well, it's a genuine breakthrough in the sense that it does appear that this longest government shutdown in history is likely to come to an end. Now, as your correspondent mentioned, this is only funding the government until approximately the end of January, so we may well be back here in 2 or 3 months. The other big political story here in Washington, D.C., though, is the enormous uproar within the Democratic Party, particularly from people who are on the left or even in the mainstream of the party, targeted against these 8 Democrats who have decided to sign on for the compromise. That has proven and is proving very unpopular and very divisive within the Democratic Party.
And why did they do that? What's motivating these Democratic centrists to make this deal now? Why put up this fight for so long when in the end they didn't really get what they wanted with the healthcare funding?
Yeah, that's exactly right. They are saying that basically they came to the conclusion that the Democratic strategy wasn't working. In other words, that there was no realistic prospect of getting these subsidies for health insurance extended. And if that was not a realistic possibility, then you may as well fold your tent and get the government reopened again. Democrats who are critical of that position note that the party won a number of significant elections just last Tuesday. The critics within the Democratic Party believe that they had the upper hand and that they have effectively been sold out by these 8 who voted to reopen the government.
So are the grassroots progressives within the Democratic Party seeing this as a compromise or a capitulation?
A capitulation, clearly. And I think it's a good juxtaposition you put in your question. They are seeing it as a situation where they believe they had the upper hand. They point not only to those elections I mentioned, but also to some recent opinion polls. Most opinion polls had suggested that a plurality of Americans had been blaming President Trump and the Republicans for this shutdown. So that is fueling that accusation of capitulation.
What about the Republicans, Niall? How much of this is about managing Donald Trump's reaction?
Well, I think that the Republicans always have an eye on the White House and they never want to get crosswise with Donald Trump or offend him. Now, as it turns out, I think Republicans will be encouraged by what has happened because, in essence, they have stood pretty resolutely saying that they're not going to make this concession that Democrats wanted on healthcare, and they have, in effect, prevailed. They have not made that concession, and it seems like we're on the brink of reopening the government. That will please both the Republican Party in general and President Trump.
And so if the government reopens temporarily, what's the next flashpoint in your view? Are we just setting up another shutdown fight early next year?
Yes, I think that will be the next big congressional fight. Having said that, we have congressional fights all the time now. The United States system of government is based on the idea that both parties will come together in good faith and compromise. There's very little compromise generally goes on in American politics these days, which means that there is a constant partisan war being waged on Capitol Hill between Republicans who mostly vote almost unanimously and Democrats who do the same thing in the opposite direction.
Niall Stanage, very good to talk to you about this. Thank you so much for sharing your views with us. Niall Stanage in Washington, D.C. there.
Thank you.
Don't miss out. Get the full picture. Subscribe to Al Jazeera for reliable news, expert insight. Like, share, stay ahead.